Hello, welcome back to Vancouver Bass Players. My name is Laurence Mollerup, and today I'm going to be interviewing Jen Hodge. Jen, do you want to play us in?
Sure, I'd love to.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. That sounds great.
My pleasure.
Yeah, really. So we talked about that before, so I know that's an Oscar Pettiford, like you said, a hidden track that's a little bit harder to find from a radio broadcast. And I was wondering about that record solos, duos, and trios with Pitter Patter Panther and Trickle Tinkle and those tunes that bass players know well, I think. And Pettiford is just such a amazing bass player to transcribe. That's fantastic.
Yeah, one of my favorites for sure. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Alan Matheson for hipping me to that recording. Um, he sent that to me near the beginning of the lockdown period. That I guess I'm in like week 10 of having left New York and everything now. And at first I was really struggling to find the inspiration to practice. And it was when Alan sent me that, and I was like, this is so cool, and I've never heard it before, and I would love to be able to play it. That like got me out of my slump there during the lockdown.
Yeah, so having projects, this is mine lately, is these interviews, and having those projects, it's a great way to keep yourself moving forward. We were talking yesterday, another friend and I were talking about how we've also have this sort of expectation to be productive, and I've got to bake bread and I've got to run 10 kilometers a day, and I've run five and I've baked apple pies, but
Wow, very impressive.
yeah, right. And I've also done the day where you sort of sleep in and you're kind of useless all day. I've done plenty of those too. So I think it's interesting, right? Having a project, but without sort of pushing yourself or being hard on yourself if you have some of those off days during this quarantine time.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think being super hard on yourself ever really gets you where you want it to. I think it's important that we be patient and kind with ourselves, because we're all in a completely unprecedented time right now. We don't have the coping skills to deal with not being able to see our friends for 2.5+ months. Like, so if we need to sleep in and eat ice cream for breakfast, that's fine.
Done it.
I
Not
heard that
today.
in one of the other interviews. I was like, that sounds like a good idea.
So you're busy practicing, and you're back in BC right now. You had moved to New York, and now you're back home for a while. And you're are you doing any like playing online? I know some people are doing these collaborations, and some people are teaching or giving classes. Are you are you making music with your friends online, or is that just mostly a solo pursuit right now?
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I have done a few of those little a cappella projects, which has been totally fun. I think at first I it bummed me out a bit because I thought, oh, this is it's just a substitute for the real thing, and it's not as good. But there's no way that there's no reason that you can't just have fun doing that, even if it doesn't have to be the. It's not like sorry, it's not like it's gonna take the place of playing music with other people for the rest of our lives. So
Yes.
yeah, making little collaborative short videos for the internet with your friends is still a fun thing to do with your friends, and you can think of ways to have fun with that within the confines of it and be creative that way. I think I've wound up having fun doing those. And I'm totally game to do more if anybody listening wants to do any bass a cappella collaborations. And then I've also done, I did one solo concert about, oh man, already about like 6 weeks ago, probably kind of mid-April. I did an hour-long solo concert online, so I had to really work up some solo bass repertoire because I'd never done a solo concert before.
Good on you.
It was a good opportunity. I've done also a couple of the big swing dance events that I would have performed at have come up with creative ways to have an event online. So I've done a bit of Zoom DJing for some of those, where instead of leading a band, I've like curated a set list or a playlist on my computer, which has been totally fun. And
when you mention that, Jen, one of the things people should know about you, and I've noticed this as well looking at your website, is that Jen Hodge All Stars, your era of music is really 1900 to about 1935, and that's what you're focusing in. So would that be what you were DJing as well?
So that might have been an old bio you were looking at. When I started my Jen Hodge All Stars project, I was focusing on 1900 to 1935 for that repertoire. I have definitely expanded because I started that project about 10 years ago. So I've definitely kind of expanded in my band leading. And there's a huge community of people in New York and kind of all over the world that play traditional jazz and swing music that are great musicians, where the point is not to recreate something that happened a long time ago. It's more to like practice that tradition and to still do so with your own voice, and it's a creative pursuit that's different every time. So actually that night that I'm thinking about that I DJ'd, I mostly played contemporary recordings of people I know and love who all could use some work. So I put up all the links of everybody's recordings that I played. I was like, hey, if you like this, like, go take advantage of the Bandcamp Fridays, and that all of these people need some money right now. So
well, let's do that again here. I know what I know about your background, and at Capilano you were in an exceptional year with a bunch of great musicians. Like you were mentioning before, a lot have moved on to Toronto and New York, and those are bandmates that you still get to work with in New York City. So you mentioned Alan Matheson already, and of course one of the best mentors that BC will ever have.
Yes.
And as well, I think you're probably an honorary Arnson. Are you a little bit Norwegian now as well?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I'm the sister, whether regardless of my actual DNA or not. We're definitely family, me and that crew.
Yeah, so that'd be Evan Arnson and Arn Arnson and Tom and Lloyd as well, and the band Black Stick that you've played with as well.
Yes, yeah, and Lloyd's been a very important mentor for me. Lloyd started hiring me when I was still in first year. I think I did my first gig of Lloyd's when I was 18, and I remember it very well because Tom Arnson was playing piano, and he's very good, and it was very intimidating, and Lloyd would call these tunes, and I just didn't know them. Like, even if they were easy tunes like Careless Love or, Bill Bailey or that kind of thing, I didn't grow up with that kind of music. And I loved it. I gravitated towards it once I was exposed to it after I moved to the mainland. But I remember being on that gig and Lloyd's calling these tunes Sweet Sue, whatever. I was like, I don't know that song. I've never heard it before. Instead of, like, if you're doing a jam at school and that happens, it's always like, oh, well, let's think of another tune then. How about this one? Let's just play a blues. But on those gigs, he'd say, Well, that's okay. It's in the key of F and it starts on C7. One, two. I learned so much from that. I remember the end of that first gig because like Tom maybe wasn't as used to that. And I remember him kind of like looking over and being annoyed. And at the end of the gig, he said, "Gotta learn them tunes, kid." I wrote down every tune that I'd never heard of and I went home and learned them. And then the next time I had a Lloyd gig, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be ready. I learned all those tunes I didn't know from the last time. And then on the next gig, it was all different tunes and I had exactly the same issue. So, but that was amazing life lesson because I still have to do that, right? Like we all do. Ideally, we'll be learning tunes until the day we die if we're willing to take on that pursuit, and it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely been in those situations as well. And one of my first teachers was George Kohler for jazz bass, and he always had us play along with the radio. And you couldn't tell what was going to be on. And in Alberta, there was a lot of country music, and then there
Right.
was rock and jazz, and we had all kinds of music on the radio growing up, especially the university radio station. And he would just say, just dive in and figure it out by ear. And even before I knew any theory, I was just getting in the habit of being in that uncomfortable space. So
Right.
yeah, Lloyd's done that with me as well. And good for you, though. I mean, that's grace under pressure to take a situation like that and not collapse, but go, okay, I'm going to dig in and find my resilience and be better next time. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the key to why you've had success as a band leader and bass player is not sort of letting those situations close you down, but digging in and finding your way of powering through.
I also owe a lot to band leaders like Lloyd and like Bria Skonberg and Simon Stribling, who all kind of did that same kind of thing for me and continued to hire me after that first gig where I didn't know any of the tunes. Like I'm very grateful to have been given additional chances, and yeah, I mean, I'm very much the musician I am today because of those opportunities. So thank you
Exactly.
guys.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And so when you grew up in Courtenay, there's a famous music camp there. So I know, like I saw you at CAP, but I know before that you had a history taking some lessons with, I would imagine people like David Brown, who was one of my
Mm-hmm.
teachers as well.
Yes. Yeah, David Brown and Jody Prosnick
Oh,
were the
fantastic.
two bass teachers that I learned from at that camp, the Courtney Youth Music Camp, and they were just completely invaluable. I learned so much from both of them, um, and yeah, they're both great bass players and lovely, lovely humans.
Wonderful. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and then Cap, and then after that you were playing professionally, and you didn't go on to other places after you finished your degree.
I haven't done any more institutional learning since I graduated from CAP, which was in 2007. I've uh, I've learned a great deal from just picking people's brains when you're like at the same festival as somebody awesome. And then I also I started learning tuba a year and a half ago. So I have taken a bunch of lessons in the past year and a half, but on tuba, not so much on the bass.
Oh,
One of the
nothing.
things about moving to New York is that I was thinking I'd like to find somebody to take some bass lessons with who had time to teach me.
Well,
I
nothing
hadn't
beats
hadn't
real
found the right
world.
person yet. What's that?
Yeah, nothing beats real world experience anyway. In jazz, you need to be thrown into that deep end and have to come up with a bass line that's going to work. And that pressure is something that you can't underrate. That right? That
Yeah, it's so crucial.
yeah. So that's interesting about playing tuba because, like you were saying, that's the old double. In the old days, you had the worst instruments to carry around. You had the double bass and a tuba at the same time, one on each arm, and moving around in New York City. I can't imagine.
Yeah, there was only one day that I needed each of them in the same day so far. But it was a real logistical challenge because I couldn't manage both of them uh, on the subway, at least not. And then once you get where you're going, it's so crowded, it's hard to leave, especially like needing the tuba, and I have a sousaphone too, so of course it's like the biggest kind of tuba. And like needing to play the tuba, and then like I would just be beside myself with stress stashing my bass somewhere because everywhere is so crowded, and you know. So yeah, that was quite an exciting day. I had to like, I live in Brooklyn. I had to go into Manhattan and do my tuba job, and then go back to Brooklyn. And I had just enough time to get back there, swap instruments, and get back into Manhattan with my bass.
Wow.
I did it. I felt very. I really felt like I'm doing this New York thing for sure.
And that's your cardio for the day too, right?
Mm. Yeah, and a lot of those subway stations don't have elevators, and many bass players cautioned me once I arrived in town to never take your upright bass on an escalator in the subway station, because a very common bass injury, as in injury to the bass out there, is you're becoming up from a lower level and on the escalator, and the ceiling starts getting lower and lower and lower, and there's just nothing you can do. You can't escape, and it's crowded, so you can't like lie the bass down or whatever, and like the ceiling just comes and crushes the neck. Woo.
Yeah, I think I have a recurring nightmare that looks a lot like that. And all the things that all our instruments have been through, moving them around in small pits and in and out of cars, and carrying drum sets on top of the bass and all those things over the years. Boy, there's a set of stories we could all come up with, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. Maybe we could do a special of these one day where we get a whole bunch of people on the call telling tales.
We could get Gerard Shemaya and have everybody tell, he could embarrass us all with the repair work he's had to do for us
That's
doing
a
stupid
great
things.
idea. That's a great idea. I feel like Gerard's earned the right to embarrass us all with stories like that by now. That
Absolutely.
I look forward to that episode.
Okay, well, I'll book it. So I was going to also mention that you have a CD out fairly recently that's done really well for you, and with Jen Hodge All Stars, and that's called All's Fair in Love and Jazz. I think that's a great title.
Thank you. the The title came from there was a like a bit of a party the night between the 2 days of recording, that a bunch of us went to, and I think it was Arntzen said we were talking about. So I don't even remember what we were talking about anymore. But Arndt said that basically, or Arndt said something similar to that, and then I said all's fair in love and jazz, something like that, and I thought, oh, I think that's going to be the name of the album we're recording.
Excellent.
Yeah, yeah. I've been very proud of that little album, baby. It has done really well, and I think I'm proud of the arrangements, and I just had the most killer band for it, so that's been really great. And I actually recorded a new album almost exactly a year ago that I've had experienced a couple of setbacks about putting that out, but I'm hoping to get it out before this year is done. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, and yeah, it's great.
Well, that's really cool. And when you recorded, were you here in Vancouver, or was that in New York?
In Vancouver.
Okay.
Yeah, both the one that's in the can and All's Fair in Love and Jazz were recorded out in White Rock at a private home. Actually, I worked with Tony Chamberlain,
Oh yeah.
the
Yeah.
yeah sound engineer, and when we were brainstorming about studios for recording All's Fair, eventually he thought of this house because for the sound and experience that I wanted to achieve, I wanted to have everybody in the same room. It's like all live off the floor except vocals, which we recorded later. But um, yeah, it can be hard to have a big enough space for that. So Tony thought of this house. It's a really good friend of his, and and that was really great because it made for such a nice vibe for the session. We had everybody set up in a circle, so we all had excellent eye contact, and we're like out in the woods, so there was no traffic noise, and yeah, it was very very relaxed, and I think that served the music really well.
I love playing sessions where you're not in an ISO booth necessarily.
Yeah.
If they build a little sort of tent around the front of the bass to do some isolation, but you can see the other musicians and actually hear them in the same physical space. The way records used to be made with, one mic in the middle of the room, that's maybe a little too far, but I think some of that goes a long way in terms of getting that intimacy in the performance and that
Yeah.
quick interaction that, jazz is all about the interaction. It's not about
100%.
somebody playing their part perfectly. It's about how it all fits together and makes a conversation.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you need to be ready and willing and able to change your plan depending on what happens in the moment. And yeah, so that's been great having that opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I was thinking maybe as a way to wrap up today, if that's not too quick a segue, you started out with Oscar Pettiford, who every bass player needs to know about for sure. Even if you're not a big jazz fan, you want to at least spend some time with him as a grandpappy of a lot of us, as a bass
Yeah.
player. Maybe I could have you list maybe a few of your favorite recordings, most inspirational players that you like, and that might be a nice way to round out the session today.
Sure, yeah. I have so many bass players that I love so much, so it'll be hard to pick a couple.
Yeah,
Um, I made a post yesterday about how it would have been NHOP's birthday. So the past couple days, I've been listening to that album Chops with him and Joe Pass.
for
I
sure.
love that one. One of my all-time favorite bass albums is Edgar Meyer's Uncommon Ritual,
Yeah,
and maybe a lot of people might not have checked that out in the like jazz and electric bass world. That's very much worth checking out. Um, of course, Ray Brown is one of my all-time favorites. The Oscar Peterson trio stuff is some of my very favorite recorded music. And I would highly recommend checking out Jimmy Blanton, who is I guess that Oscar Pettiford Duke Ellington feature that we started the show out with today. Oscar Pettiford was one of the bass players that followed Jimmy Blanton in the Duke Ellington band, and basically until Scott LaFaro came along, every bass player between Blanton and then was taking their cues directly from Jimmy Blanton, I would say, and it can be easy to skip him depending on where you start, where you pick up the thread of your own jazz adventure. But yeah, transcribing Jimmy Blanton has been very inspiring for me and very illuminating about some of the other bass players that I love also.
you just made me realize that when I mentioned the solos, duos, trios, it's Blanton, it's not Pettiford, and I had conflated the two bass players. So that's
Yeah. Okay. I wasn't
thanks for
sure
that
if that album you
embarrassing.
were talking about was multiple different people. So that's all Jimmy Blanton.
It's
Yeah.
all Blanton, and they
Great
play in a
stuff.
sentimental mood and stuff like that. And I
Yes.
picked up the copy in Japan. At that time it was a hard record to find, and I happened to be over there when I got it. But I can't believe I just.
Oh yeah. No worries. Um, yeah. In fact, I think it's not the first time that's happened in a conversation about Oscar Pettiford recently that I've been a part of. So definitely don't beat yourself up.
Well, I'm no historian, that's for sure. One thing I love about Pettiford is his right hand, and when you
Mhm.
mentioned Niels Henning, it's so completely different. He's playing. I think you can see his hand this kind of angle,
Yeah.
and it's all three fingers, and then Pettiford, it's one finger, and it's more like a classical pizzicato. So I just love those differences. For me, the right hand is a big part of bass playing.
Mhm. Oh
Um,
yeah.
Maybe why don't we wrap up with you showing us the difference? Would you be willing to do that and show us the sound?
Sure. I'll try my best. I,
Okay. Yeah, maybe of the two different right hand positions because they also had very different setups. And of course
yes,
different
I was gonna
strings.
say, as
Yeah.
much as I adore Niels Henning, I've never sounded very much like him. Um, let's see. So the Pettiford, Jimmy Blanton, Ray Brown kind of approach is more like of tune easily. Whereas the N-hop thing, yeah, I mean, I don't even think I can play anything as fast as that guy. Something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that was great. That's great. It's a whole, even on Zoom, which as we know has its limitations, you can hear the different sound that you're getting out, and your phrasing too is quite different depending on which position your right hand is in. So there's the lesson, right? I think that's a great thing to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I should go practice that stuff more too.
Well, shouldn't we all? I mean, who actually can play like Niels, or Oscar or Jimmy for that matter?
Yeah.
I think we're all influenced by them, but it's a lifelong challenge for sure.
Yes, and thank goodness. Isn't that a wonderful thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to go practice too. So thank you so much for today, Jen. I've really enjoyed talking with you, and I hope the Vancouver bass players will enjoy this as well. And I wish you all the best, and hope that the world returns to something healthier and that you can get back to your new life in New York City as soon as that option becomes available to you.
Thank you so much, Laurence. Thanks so much for having me on. It's so great to talk to you.
You too. Thanks, Jen.
All right, take care.